Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to us at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays to tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to reshare. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, welcome to everyone. My name is Sara Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. And before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. Thank you. As we get started, I have just a few housekeeping details to share with you. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to share your name, your city or your state, and your organization. Be sure when engaging in the chat box to select everyone so that we all know who is here. And feel free to share your thoughts and ideas and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to those questions you post, and our panelists will be typing out answers throughout the conversation. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any slides, bios, and resources, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who have registered for the conversation. And lastly, we'll be posting a brief on-screen poll during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we get started, I wanted to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars. Later this afternoon, we hope you will join us for a session co-sponsored by the Stanford Center on Early Childhood, where we will hear from researchers and practitioners who will discuss the latest data from the Rapid Survey Project at the Stanford Center on Early Childhood. That'll be today at 3 p.m. Next week at 12:30, we have an exciting peer exchange conversation, co-sponsored by New America at 12:30, to learn about 3 prototypes for enhancing communication and building relationships that are already improving the dynamics between schools and parents. The registration links for both those sessions will be posted in the chat box now. And we hope that you'll join us for our upcoming Technology Enhanced Teaching and Learning Institute, kicking off next week at 3 p.m., so after that peer exchange session. This series of sessions is designed to explore opportunities for leveraging technology-enhanced teaching and learning in the classroom, home and community to close the gaps, and accelerate equitable learning recovery. Registration links for all of these great sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. And last thing to flag, we hope that you will save the date and register to join us for GLR Week 2025, which will be taking place from July 28th to August 1st. GLR Week will feature double headers each day that will lift up and highlight several targeted big bet interventions and approaches that are helping it to close the gaps and drive early school success for children in economically challenged families. Again, all of the registration links and all of the great information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope that you can join us. Sorry, it just keeps going. There we go. And joining you now is Sara Torian, Chief Learning and Engagement Officer with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
So many good learning opportunities in the coming weeks. Thanks for sharing those, Sara, and I really do hope that all of you can join us for those. But first, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could join us for today's timely and important, and I feel like I'm saying those words, timely and important, a lot these days, but it really is true, funder to funder conversation featuring our partners at PBS KIDS and highlighting both the research-driven content that it develops and disseminates and the powerful support roles that PBS member stations play in communities, connecting and supporting local educators, partners, families, and children. Today's session builds on a series of GLR Learning Tuesdays sessions that we've hosted in the past couple of months that seek to center children in various policy debates, asking if the various policy proposals will lead to more hopeful futures for children, or if they might result in children becoming collateral damage to those policies, those cuts. Over the past 2 months, we've explored policy shifts and or proposed funding cuts related to the U.S. Department of Education, to programs like Medicaid, Head Start, and SNAP, and also the impact to children of accelerated immigrant deportation and detention, and the rescission of protections on protected places like schools and hospitals. Today, we will focus on PBS KIDS, as I said before, and what the proposed funding cuts there would mean for children, including the termination of the competitive Ready to Learn grants that are administered by the U.S. Department of Education, and also the rescissions package that would claw back funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports PBS. That package has already been passed by the House and is now under consideration in the Senate, hence the timely and important nature of today's conversation. We'll be hearing from PBS leaders in Washington, D.C., but also leaders of member stations from a couple of different communities across the country, and also from funders that support high-quality children's media. And with that rescission package, as I said, currently up for a vote at the Senate, we'll discuss what funders and others can do to voice their support for PBS and the programming and the resources that it delivers to children and families. And to begin that conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our panel for today. Welcome first to Gregg Behr. Gregg serves as the executive director of the Grable Foundation, based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he has helped to lead Remake Learning, a community-wide learning ecosystem of educators, scientists, artists, and makers that has sparked replication in communities across the country and beyond. Gregg is also co-author of When You Wonder, You're Learning, Mr. Rogers' Enduring Lessons for Raising Creative, Curious, and Caring Kids. Welcome also to Sara DeWitt. Sara serves as the Senior Vice President and General Manager at PBS KIDS, where she is responsible for the strategic direction and dynamic PBS KIDS media service that supports children ages 2 to 8, their parents, teachers and caregivers, and their local communities. Welcome also to Gina Masciola. Gina serves as the Program Director for Learning Neighborhoods at WQED in Pittsburgh, where she has managed and created several projects, including WQED Writers Contest, IQ Smart Parent, WQED Smart Schools, and others. And welcome also to Jamie Myers. Jamie serves as the Chief Operating Officer and Senior Vice President of Education and Engagement at PBS SoCal, where she has expanded the breadth and depth of the organization's educational and cultural outreach across Southern California. And to guide us through today's conversation, I'm also delighted to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Dan Torres. Dan serves as the Manager of Program Partnerships at the Bezos Family Foundation, where he is focused on supporting and cultivating partnerships for the Room program, which equips parents with information and resources to boost their child's learning during the time that they spend together. Thanks to all of our panelists, and especially to you, Dan. I'll pass it over to you now.
Thanks, Sara, for the opportunity to moderate this panel. It's going to be a good conversation today. Just for those that don't know about the Room program, it is really focused on providing caregivers with the latest we know about brain science and child development in the form of what we call a brainy background. We pair that information with tips, activities you can do within your everyday moments in your life with your children 0 to 5. The program is about 10 years old and is now exists in every state and globally in many cases. In the early stages of our program, one of the key things we did is work with Daniel Tiger and have Room videos that were part of Daniel Tiger episodes in between the actual content. It was such a valuable sponsorship and partnership in terms of just building the brand credibility of Room. We believe in a trusted messenger model to get the content out in the world. And I don't know if there's a stronger trusted messenger than PBS. It meant a lot to parents that they saw Room with Daniel Tiger. Parents were co-viewing with them and seeing the important information. And we also have a lot of local partnerships across the country, and I can give dozens of examples about really strong ways in which local affiliates have helped our kind of boost and amplify our vroom partnerships on the ground. So PBS just does such an amazing job in setting a table across the country for all the important work we're trying to do in the early learning system. So it's a privilege to talk to these folks today. Um, I've said enough, and it's time to hear from our panelists. So we're going to start with Sara around setting the stage and understanding the impact of these proposed cuts that are being discussed right now. So Sara, to set the stage for today's conversation, can you tell us about PBS Kids and its content? Most of us with young kids in our lives are likely familiar with many of the shows, but can you tell us a little bit about why this content is so unique and important?
Sure. Thank you. And it's great to have everybody here today. So thank you for joining us to talk about this work. So as Dan mentioned, I'm sure many of you are familiar with PBS, but for over 50 years, PBS really has been the go-to destination for high quality children's content. And what's really important is that it's available for free to young viewers and their families across the country. We know that we are the #1 educational brand for kids, and we have a very rigorous and research-based approach to developing content. We really are focused on preparing children for success in school and in life. And through all of the technological and media changes that have happened over these 50 years, we are really focused on making sure that we are available to kids wherever they are. So on a wide range of devices, whether that's old or new. We know a lot of kids are on hand-me-down devices or on older platforms. And we really make sure that the content we're developing is curriculum-based, that allows kids to engage really seamlessly with it across all of those platforms. And really, we also want to make sure that the content that is on PBS Kids sparks learning away from the screens. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of other media organizations are building content that is focused on feeding algorithms, or just really focused on generating revenue on that bottom line. And at PBS Kids, we are specifically mission driven. We are focused on really trying to meet those needs of kids, and putting them at the center of our work, working with an amazing group of producers who really take this mission to heart and work closely with us to bring their creative vision to life and then to present it on PBS Kids. We focus on kids from ages 2 to 8, with fun, educational, and age-appropriate content that helps them learn, and really, we hope, will give them lessons that last a lifetime. So we know that parents currently rate PBS Kids as the #1 most educational media brand. And 88% of parents agree that PBS is a trusted and safe source for children to watch television and play digital games and interact with mobile apps. But today we're also going to hear from local stations, and this is another thing that makes PBS so unique. We actually have a network of stations throughout the country who own us, and whose job it is to take this media and make sure it reaches the kids who can most benefit from it. Make sure that we're reaching the kids who are harder to reach, who might not have access to high quality preschool, and to also really empower those parents, and caregivers, and teachers. So part of our programming also is really about breaking down barriers, making sure that kids see characters who reflect themselves, who are recognizable to them. So one of our latest series, Carl the Collector, was our first PBS Kids series that centered on an autistic main character. And we've heard just an outpouring from parents about how important this was for their families to see a character that really reflects the lives of the children in their own homes. In this fall, we're going to be launching Weather Hunters, which is a new STEM series designed to support kids learning about earth sciences and weather. It's brought to us by Al Roker. And we really are thinking about how do we help kids understand the world around them, and understand how weather and climate can impact individuals. And this spring, we'll be launching a brand new series called Phoebe and Jay, which is focused on supporting early literacy skills for preschoolers by showcasing the various types of texts that kids see in everyday life, from how they look at signs to read clothing labels, really that text that helps kids get through the day. So really, we are working with advisors, making sure that our content is educational and developmentally appropriate, and really trying to help kids see themselves reflected on screen so that they can have a real passion for learning and excitement about getting ready for school.
So Sarah, you mentioned there's a lot of children's content being created these days. Can you tell us about the research and planning that goes into everything you and the team create? And then how are you measuring its impact?
So all of our producers are working with outside advisors and curriculum experts to make sure that we're really meeting kids' developmental needs. So throughout that content development process, our producers and we at PBS are testing our content with kids and with parents to really ensure that it is meeting kids where they are and able to achieve its educational goals. And so we have a really different set of metrics for how we measure success than a lot of the commercial commercial competitors are right now. We're measuring success by how much kids are learning from our content, how engaged they are with it, and how inspired they are to explore something new away from the screen. We also measure success by our viewers' preparedness to enter school and actively participate in their communities and their ability to manage their emotions with others. So it means that we're focused on reaching and helping all kids in the country learn lessons that really last a lifetime. And has been a fair amount of research on PBS Kids content as well. And so a lot of this has been formative research that we've done with partners at universities or research organizations or summative evaluations. And we can share with you all a link to some of the studies that have taken place around PBS Kids content. One of my favorites is in an independent review of 45 studies, which included nearly 25,000 children between the ages of 2 and 8, we found that PBS Kids media and resources increased children's early literacy skills up to a month and a half of classroom instruction.
Those are such strong findings. As Sarah Torian mentioned in her opening comments, PBS has been in the news recently with the termination of the Ready to Learn grant in May and the House vote last week to rescind previously approved funding for public broadcasting. What is the status of these proposed cuts and what would they mean for PBS Kids content and the children and families you serve?
So there are a lot of federal funding threats and challenges for us right now. And I'll start with that, the Ready to Learn grant termination. Ready to Learn is a 30-year grant program appropriated by Congress that has supported a lot of PBS Kids content through the years, including many shows you're familiar with, Super Y, Arthur, the list goes on and on. Molly of Denali, Odd Squad, Peg Plus Cat, a lot of shows that are really well loved by audiences were supported through this grant program. That program was terminated by the Department of Education on May 2nd. We were in the 5th year of the 5-year grant cycle. And so in the moment, it means that there was an immediate loss of $23 million. That's what was left in the grant program for this year. And that money supports programming, production of programs. So some of our producing partners had to stop work on some production. It supports our discoverability efforts, a lot of our accessibility efforts to make sure that we're reaching kids in all the ways that they need to access content. And really, part of the discussion today, it really impacts the work that we do on the ground. Some of that work goes directly to member stations to help bring this content out into communities and to make sure that we are meeting kids where they are, but meeting some of those populations who have the least access to high quality educational programs for preschool. So there's also the rescission package, which, as you mentioned, Congress voted on. The House voted last week to cut funding, and it's now turned to the Senate. That'll be the next step. So there have already been cuts to PBS Kids work because that Ready to Learn grant also supported staff here at PBS. We have had to lay off 25% of the team here at PBS Kids. And we know that many of our stations throughout the country have also had to cut services or cancel camps that they had planned for the summer. and also let go of some employees. And so we know that if more cuts come, that is going to continue to affect the work that we do. We are happy, though, that we can say that we are still available for 98% of US television households. A lot of kids still access us over the air, so we can support kids learning anytime, anywhere. And that families can still stream PBS Kids for free in the PBS Kids video app, on connected TVs, on pbskids.org, and on the PBS Kids YouTube channel, as well as play games on the PBS Kids Games app or pbskids.org. So while these cuts are affecting a lot of our future pipeline and what we're able to do, we still are averaging 13 million monthly video users every month and streaming over 364 million monthly streams across all of our platforms. We know that we also reach another 2 million kids, 2 to 8, via our linear feeds. So just one more note, I think one of the things I'm most concerned about is how this funding may affect our local stations. For some of our stations in larger markets, I mean, this is going to be painful. It's painful for everyone, but it's those rural markets, it's those smaller stations that really have a greater dependence on the federal dollars. And so I think this puts a lot of the work that we do in some of those markets at risk.
Well, Sara, thank you for helping us understand some of the challenges you're facing and also just how you're still persevering through and reaching families. It's really, really impressive. We're going to now transition over and shift gears to hear from local affiliates and some of the funders that support their work on the ground. So I'm going to invite Gregg and Gina to turn their cameras on and join us. Now
Dan, can we play one video? I'd love to.
Oh yeah, we're gonna do the video. Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to show you all, because I'm sure many of you grew up with PBS Kids or know PBS through some of the children in your lives, but I thought it'd be helpful for you all to see some of the characters who are front and center on our air right now.
Hi, neighbor. I'm so glad you're here. I did it.
I'm your best friend.
And I believe in you. Hooray!
Good flashbacks with that video with my kids getting older now. So let's shift gears now with hearing from local affiliates and some funders that are supporting them. We'll start with Gregg. Gregg Grable is based in Pittsburgh in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and you've recently written a book that lifts up lessons from Mr. Roger. So I know your connection with children's public media runs deep. So can you tell us a little bit about the Grable Foundation and how you work to support children's learning and development?
Dan, it'd be an honor to. And I should note, watching that video, right, it is a flashback, because I grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street. And then when my kids were younger, watching Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and Peg Plus Cat. I feel like the luckiest kid in the world. And in fact, I really am the luckiest kid, at least in Southwestern Pennsylvania, because for nearly 20 years, I've had the privilege of leading the Grable Foundation. And we focus on kids, teachers, and families, especially kids who, for economic reasons, don't have the same opportunities as their peers. So when you think about the Grable Foundation, Dan, think about kids and learning. Think about early childhood, high quality early learning. Think about enhanced learning in public schools, out of school time, which for us is after school, mentoring, summertime learning. Think about museums and libraries and playgrounds, all of those places where caring adults and kids are learning together. And then support for parents and families all across the learning landscape. And speaking of that learning landscape, we're focused on all of the places where kids learn. As I mentioned, schools, museums, libraries, early learning centers, after-school programs, mentoring sites, online and at home, and importantly, connecting the caring adults in their lives to one another, the teachers, the librarians, the artists, the scientists, the media makers, and more. And so critical to this landscape, at least here in this corner of America, are our field building intermediaries that try and make real that Mr. Rogers sensibility, because you and I remember in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, we learned all sorts of places, right? We could be there in his living room or in the kitchen, but we were at the community garden, we were at a crayon factory, we were in all sorts of places. And we're lucky in this corner of the world that we have very strong field building organizations, the Allegheny Partnership for Out of School Time, organizations like Trying Together in the early learning space. And Sara in her generous introduction mentioned Remake Learning, which is a network of more than 2,300 partners working to advance relevant and engaging learning, early childhood through higher education, all across this geography of southwestern Pennsylvania. So I'm right here in Mr. Rogers' real life neighborhood of Western Pennsylvania.
So Gregg, before we hear from Gina Masciola from WQED in Pittsburgh, can you say a little bit about how the programming and on-the-ground resources and connections they offer complement the work that Grable is supporting in the region?
Yes, and I should note WQED, America's first public television station. So WQED has an incredible neighborhood sensibility. That sensibility of the learning landscape I just described in the context of Remake Learning, or think about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. WQED is so much more than a media platform, and it is a great one to be sure. But they are connected to our local after-school programs, to our schools, our libraries. Just two examples, because we at Grable are so proud to be able to support the educational programming at WQED. Smart Schools, for example, connects that trusted PBS content and connects it into schools and supporting teachers and the caring adults in those spaces with all sorts of great professional development as well as family engagement so that they can make use of those PBS resources for learning and educational purposes. Or another program called Inquire Within, which is a partnership among WQED and local libraries supporting both literacy and literacy instruction with hands-on family-centered activities. And so we're proud to support QED. And I should note, too, that we are proud to support the development of content. Fred Rogers Productions is based right here in Pittsburgh, and the Grable Foundation was a founding funder of Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, everyone's favorite show, at least mine. And it's been joyful to see some of the recent research. Sarah's mentioning research, but some of the research published just recently by UCLA about how the life lessons of kids like my own kids who are now teenagers and how those teenagers are influenced all of those years later in being able to use the tools that they learned in Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood in managing their emotions and their progress in their teenage years. It's the lasting impact and the joy and the meaningfulness of PBS and all that it offers. And we see that right here in our hometown with WQED and the incredible work of Gina.
Yeah, I just read that study a week or two ago. I encourage others to read it. It is really fascinating how sticky in a good way that information is for the teens. So we'll turn to Gina. So Gina, building on what Gregg has just shared, can you tell us a little bit more about WQED, the region you serve, some of your kids' programming and work in the region, and then how you bring that together and support community partners?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here to share this work. And yeah, thanks to Gregg for that amazing introduction and lead in with programs and content that QED is creating and the programs we're helping to support. I think that QED serves a huge geographic footprint here in southwestern Pennsylvania. So 7 counties, they are very diverse. The populations that we are reaching are diverse in cultural and ethnic diversity. There's a ton of economic diversity. There are suburban, urban, and rural pieces to our footprint. And then there's also generational diversity here in Pittsburgh that we are challenged by, but also creates opportunity for us. And so taking all of that diversity and figuring out how public media can help service those populations in the most succinct and best ways has been what we've been focused on, specifically in this education department for the past 10 years. One of the things that we learned through our Ready to Learn work here in Pittsburgh is that it's really important to listen to our communities. And we learned about that and were really excited and privileged to be part of Ready to Learn very early on in my career here at WQED. And through working with their researchers, we started to understand that the strengths and needs assessments were really important. Once we started implementing those strengths and needs assessments with partners and organizations that we were working with, we were really able to hone in on what they needed. And that allowed us to create some of the specific programming that met needs of communities. It allowed us to create programs like Gregg mentioned, like WQED Smart Schools, where we worked intimately with organizations and with school educators to meet the needs of their communities and to highlight the strengths that they had, not by just creating content, but by using the content that PBS Kids has created at the national level to create engaging, hands-on activities that support what's happening in that inspirational media content that we are getting from the national level.
Thanks for sharing that, Gina. Very helpful perspective. We're now going to hear from the Southern California region and have Jamie Myers join us. So Jamie, can you share some highlights of the work that PBS SoCal does to support children, families, educators, and community partners in Southern California?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. And really, this is unbelievable. Just like 150 people who care so much about kids and families on a webinar this morning. So thank you to everyone who's joining us and for your time to really just kind of honor and center kids, I think, in everything we do. First and foremost, PBS SoCal brings PBS Kids to life for children across all of Southern California. We serve 10 SoCal counties. It's approximately 19 million people with all the best of PBS Kids, research-based content, games, resources. And we connect with families and children on the ground for really meaningful experiences with those beloved characters and curriculum that Sara outlined for everyone. It's all about kind of taking it on the ground for families to really see and feel in person, in addition to the millions of ways that Southern California communities are actually accessing that PBS Kids content. And we've also had the really deep privilege, like Gina, of working with Ready to Learn content and resources for decades in California. And we know that the loss of Ready to Learn is going to have a direct effect on the communities that we serve. But we also know that early childhood education is pretty much in the DNA of PBS, PBS Kids, and really PBS SoCal. So I wanted to share a little bit today about how we've built on that deep commitment to build a locally incubated initiative, very similar to how Gina described it, co-designed with families, that's now available nationally for free in use in communities. And this program's called Family Math. It's a research-based, multi-platform, bilingual program that really centers around positivity, confidence, and knowledge of foundational math skills for children 2 to 5. And the program equips parents and caregivers with strategies and resources to facilitate meaningful math experiences at home. And we're often asked kind of, what does it mean by multi-platform? Same with the PBS Kids content. What does multi-platform really mean? And that's all about having programs that can move and go with families throughout their day. It's everything from printables to videos to messages that they see on air and workshops that they can participate in their local library on their school. And Family Math, like the PBS Kids content, lives on air, online, on the ground, and at your kitchen table. And just like the impact that we're building on with the PBS Kids research and the Ready to Learn research and this deep library of commitment, you can even see in the chat all the studies that have been done of this work. Family Math in its last couple of years has actually done research on more than 50,000 parents and caregivers. And the data that we've collected has shown that we've actually moved the needle in that space. We know that we've moved knowledge of foundational math skills by 13%. We've moved caregivers' confidence building by 14%. And we've actually increased parents' positivity of math by 11%. You can check out all that content on the Family Math YouTube channel, which has millions of views of our amazing content that supplements and connects with the Ready to Learn and the PBS Kids content at the national. And more recently, we've had the privilege of working with the Stanford Center on Early Learning for another study that's actually proved that Family Math is successful in scale in both Arizona and Alabama. So shout out to my friends on the webinar today from those spaces. Family Math has been studied now at scale and shows statistically significant gains in those communities as well with parents and children. That work, like Ready to Learn, is now being implemented across 20 cities in the nation with schools, early childhood centers, community-based organizations. And we're really proud to bring math to families and children nationally. And we're really proud to be the destination for all the PBS Kids content that Sara shared earlier for Southern California kids.
That's great research. You can just imagine some of the long-term benefits of engaging young too on that topic. So Jamie, earlier in the conversation, Sara DeWitt talked a little bit about the Ready to Learn grants provided by the U.S. Department of Education. As a Ready to Learn grantee, can you tell us about some of the programming and resources that PBS SoCal has developed and how they're supporting children's learning and development?
Absolutely. Really similar to WQED, we have work that's happening on the ground in East Los Angeles. This is a 5-year commitment we've made to the community of East Los Angeles between the East Los Angeles Community College, the library, the small center-based organizations there, and a deep work that we've committed on the ground there. But I want to share in the spirit of scale the work we're doing at the state of California, which is a little unique and different in the way that Ready to Learn is bringing resources to an entire state of caregivers and really the FFN community, family, friend, and neighbors. We partnered with the state of California's Child Care Resource Center, which is housed in the departments that really reach out to families directly and are serving families most in need at the state, and partnered on their preschool development grant. And we partnered to curate a box of resources that pulled from PBS Kids resources to the PBS SoCal resources to really just everyday things like toothbrushes even, or things that might be needed in a home of a child who might be in need. And we've curated those boxes to be connected through a network of milestones and more at the state, and brought boxes out to FFNs for free in English and Spanish with tip cards and different materials that are really moving the needle on early childhood development concepts, but really supporting the everyday routines of children. And that was a core part of our scaling of the Ready to Learn work at the state of California.
It's great to hear. It's such an important population, hard to reach, and giving them valuable resources is just hugely important at the community level. I want to bring back the full panel now. We have a few more guiding questions. So full panel is now back with us. So it's especially for Jamie and Sara, but as Sara Torian mentioned in her opening comments, CGLR has been using its webinars in recent months to explore the potential impact on children and various policy proposals and funding cuts. So asking the question if a particular proposal is likely to lead to more helpful futures for children or result in children as collateral damage. You have all shared highlights about some of the resources and programming delivered by PBS. I'd like to learn a little more about the impact of these programs and resources. Starting with programming developed with Ready to Learn funding, what are some of the programs developed with Ready to Learn grants? What is unique about Ready to Learn? And then what impact are you seeing from this particular piece of PBS Kids programming?
So I'll start then, and then throw to my station colleagues. As I mentioned, the Ready to Learn grant program has been around for a long time, and it's funded series like Arthur and Super Y, Reading Rainbow, but more recently Odd Squad and Work It Out Wombats and Lila in the Loop. And there have been research studies throughout. I saw that Shelley Pasnick from EDC posted some of the great work they've done with us. We know that Eleanor Wonders Why is a STEM show that was funded by Ready to Learn. And we know through the research that EDC led on that program that parents gained confidence in supporting their children's math and science learning through the use of Eleanor Wonders Why. I mentioned earlier that the show Super Why has had a statistically significant impact on kids' literacy gains. And we also have done research on accessibility through Ready to Learn, really trying to understand how we can reach kids who aren't able to just watch television or access games as easily. So we have done some work with Bridge Multimedia to think about how we can make sure that we are accessible to kids who are deaf or hard of hearing, or for kids who can't access the audio content of a story via captions. Maybe they are pre-readers. And so really trying to think about how they could benefit from American Sign Language translations. So our production partners, Fred Rogers Productions and GBH in Boston, really helped to guide this work, helping us do some research about the best ways to offer ASL interpretations of the content. So there's the content itself and how it can affect the curriculum gains for all kids, but then also we've been able to go deep in terms of how that content can help with our accessibility, making sure we can reach more kids. So we have another video I'd love to share that is a testimonial around the show Work It Out Wombats. So I'll talk a little bit about the show. That show is focused on computational thinking, so the early building blocks of computer science, being able to put things in order, being able to find patterns, things like that. And so what you'll see is some information about the impact of that show itself, but also on our ability to offer that show with American Sign Language interpretation. So maybe we can pause and roll that clip.
Hello, I'm hearing. My husband is hearing, and our child is deaf. And we enjoy a lot of the same things that other families enjoy. Before PBS Kids, I always had this feeling that I was letting her down because what we were watching wasn't really accessible to her. She was only getting like a third of what it was about. I was so surprised when my daughter first took concepts from this show, Work It Out Wombats, with the interpreter built in, and started applying them completely independently. It was totally her idea to draw one of the characters, label steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and then start cutting out those body parts in the order that she had planned in advance. What an amazing skill that she's going to use for the rest of her life to take a project, break it down into steps, and execute on it. I know some families who a parent will get up and interpret next to the TV, and I don't want to have to do that. Like, I want to just be able to sit and relax and enjoy a show together and know that she's understanding everything and I'm understanding everything and we can enjoy it together. And PBS Kids has finally made that possible.
I know that Work It Out Wombats is a show that I know SoCal in particular has really brought out into the community. So maybe Jamie, you can share a little bit about it.
I mean, I think that video is such a perfect example of the work that is happening with parents and families. You could have a million examples of just one parent who is completely impacted by that change that we made in the way we deliver our service. And so in a similar way, Work It Out Wombats has been brought to families across the state in partnership with libraries. I saw someone in the Q&A was asking, like, specifically, who are you working with to bring content out? And we have a partnership with the state of California libraries, hundreds of libraries across the state, where we actually have curated kits for the summer. In many cases, libraries run in the state of California a program called Lunch at the Library. That's where food is offered in the state when food isn't necessarily offered at elementary schools for families. And so having programming side by side with a place where families are coming to have a meal together, we've taken Work It Out Wombats and we found ways to connect that into and provide the libraries with resources they might not have had to have side by side with those meals with families. They can enjoy the content, they can do activities together. You saw such a perfect example of that child drawing and connecting in that space. And I think an example of libraries being a great partner in the work that we all do, both locally, but then even nationally.
Okay, this next question is for all panelists. And we know Ready to Learn is a significant piece of PBS Kids programming, but it's not all of it. So zooming out from that piece, what is the impact of the other programming and resources developed by PBS? How do you track your impact and what are you seeing?
So I can jump in for this piece. I think that Ready to Learn for us has been a springboard into how to really leverage and use the other content that's created by PBS Kids producers and other content that is available to stations from PBS. I think that one of the biggest benefits for Pittsburgh is having WQED on the ground, and the ability for us to, and I mentioned this before, and so did Jamie, but bring those experiences to life for children and families. And Ready to Learn has given us the tools to be able to implement that with other programming. So example, much like they have talked about the Work It Out Wombats and the lunch at the library, several stations around here created the Curious Club using content from Curious George. They have created Wildcat Wednesdays, where they are watching the Wildcats at a similar kind of program like Jamie described in SoCal. So really, because we don't have students, families, and kids and teachers in our building, those partnerships and collaborations with other organizations in Southwestern Pennsylvania are extremely important and valuable to the work that we are trying to do to support all of our community.
And Dan, if I can jump in, Gina used the word springboard. Those Ready to Learn grants are such incredible springboards to prompt PBS stations to think about how they make PBS Kids matter in places where we as families are. And in education philanthropy, we're completely privileged to be able to support schools and museums and libraries. And we talk all the time about quality, high quality early learning, high quality after school programs, high quality teacher instruction. But we're not the ones doing the work. And that quality is there only if the rigor and relevance of the content is there. And we know the rigor and relevance of the content produced by PBS Kids and all of the media makers that are partners. And to be able to see that bridge, that springboard from PBS Kids into places like Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, or Washington, Pennsylvania, or other communities you probably haven't heard of in this corner of the world, or communities that Jamie would describe in Southern California that we just don't know, it matters, and they're making it matter in the most brilliant ways possible. And absent Ready to Learn, that content and that quality isn't there.
I would say too, the Ready to Learn grants were able to support a level of research rigor that we don't have the funding for every show. But that means that all of our producers are benefiting from this research. There are certainly really important findings that are coming from every study we do that then we're able to share with the entire producer community, but also with the industry, with the field at large. We know that there are grad students studying Ready to Learn research in classes all the time. And I think that helps raise the bar for all kids media. Helps us better understand how they learn from it, helps us better understand how parents and educators can integrate it into learning opportunities with their kids. So there's a lot that goes into this program that then can be used widely across the community. From the research side, also in those accessibility experiments, things that we then, it started with Ready to Learn, or it started with Department of Ed grants, but then we were able to replicate that and bring that to the wider series, all the library of the series.
I'd also say that the springboard locally for us, in so many ways is that deep research and that impact that was created at the national level and really seeded by Ready to Learn. Living in Southern California, the media landscape and all of the competitors in children's media are in our building and next door and down the block, and really being able to differentiate ourselves when we're talking about the highest quality, as Gregg shared, that's really moving the needle with families. I think I come back to that time and time again. Nowadays, kids have a lot of choices to watch content, and so many of those choices are not the highest quality options that are available. And so when you're thinking about putting a child in front of a screen or thinking about connecting a screen with a child, I go back time and time again to just the deep commitment that's been made by public media over 50 plus years, as Sara said, rooted in this idea of it's going to make an impact because it's been tested to do that.
So now many of us are familiar with PBS Kids shows, but the work that affiliate stations are doing includes so much more. And we've heard about some of that already. So Jamie, Gina, and Greg touched on this a little bit above, describing some of the ways that WQED and PBS SoCal are working with partners. But I'm wondering if you can invite you to all share a little more about ways affiliate stations are engaging with local partners, with local educators, and then parents.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the other really amazing things that has happened because of our privilege of being part of Ready to Learn was, I know we've said it time and time again, but those research pieces and all of the research that we have been given and the data is so important. It was so important that we used part of our Ready to Learn funding to research our work at the local level. And so one of the really great things that's happened for us, and again, using that springboard philosophy, is it allowed us to take what was happening locally with our RTL work and use that data to go to Grable, to go to the Mellon Foundation, to go to Heinz locally and present them with the findings that we had and the programs that we were implementing and the data that supported that work and parents' views of their child's education and the outcomes that we were seeing, and ask for money to support that work and those programs in other community spaces. So that really deep dive work that we were doing as part of Ready to Learn in one community allowed us to research it and then take that information and those programs and adapt them to other places in our region that we knew needed that kind of support.
I'd also just echo, in addition to impact and in addition to research, one of the sort of key pillars of all of the work that both stations are doing on the ground, but also I keep going back to everyone who's here today, is through partnerships. So much of the work that's happening is because PBS stations have found like-minded nonprofits or centers or schools or libraries or you name it, the Boys and Girls Club, the small, for us in LA, we're actually working with small centers that support foster youth. Like you pick the kind of space where deep work can be happening with other nonprofits. And we've been able to sort of collaborate towards a common goal of serving children and families. And I think in the time that we're all living in right now, that ecosystem of people supporting other people to sort of reach and move the needle with children and families becomes so much more important, that in an effort to make sure that there's no loss of service to the families and the children on the ground, the people who are showing up today to learn more are really kind of the backbone of how everything can be taken out to communities. And I also think we're not necessarily the best at reminding everybody that it's all free. Like, no one's being charged for any of it, whether it be the app that Sara's talking about or the program at the library or the anything. Everything that's being done and created by public media stations and distributed at the national level is completely accessible for free.
Jamie, it's all free and it just feels so normal, right? You describe, I go to a library, I go to an event during Remake Learning Days, and Gina and her colleagues are there from WQED. There's a remarkable ROI to those Ready to Learn grants. One, as Gina described, it's financial, right? Because then our colleagues at WQED or PBS SoCal are able to turn to local funders who then can add to the pot and the possibility of what local stations can do, but then also make those connections to all of those places like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood where kids and families are. And we've made it all so normal. And it's frightening to think of that normalcy just disappearing, that content isn't there, that those bridges aren't there, that the quality of what families and their kids have come to expect isn't there.
I think one of the other things that PBS stations can do so well is to not just connect with partners, but connect the actual partners, connect neighbors. We are a really great home to school connection, or program to school, program to home connection. And so what your child might be learning at the library and at the school and in Pittsburgh, at the laundromat or wherever kids might be at a bus station, then they can go home and continue that learning through all of the amazing programs that are over our airwaves or online. And so being that connector is really important, and being part of that ecosystem as a PBS station is really valuable.
We have a potential video we can share. Gina, you have a video. You think it would make sense to play that video right now? Let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks. That'd be great.
I'm Denise Pejkanix,
and together we manage the Ready to Learn initiative. We have been in Washington County developing our learning neighborhood.
Through our work with the Ready to Learn initiative, we have established 4 partners in Washington County. The 4 partners include the Frank Saris Public Library in Cannonsburg, Weilandville Elementary School, which is part of the Cannon Millen School District, Blueprints from Washington County, and City Mission located in Washington County.
We began with each partner by identifying the needs that they had for their organization and the community. And Blueprints wanted to have a space where they can gather a lot of their classrooms. And Frank Saris Library wanted to bring more people from the community into the library. So through our family engagement, our family creative learning, 4-part sessions, we had them come to the Frank Saris Public Library to host those sessions. And it worked out perfectly, and Blueprints and Frank Saris Public Library saw what a great thing this could be, and they decided to open up a classroom in the Frank Saris Library. And we are happy that the partnership that we created with the Ready to Learn initiative and the Learning Neighborhood brought those 2 partners together to help them meet goals that they had.
We're here today.
As we planned for this, it would not be a PBS webinar without videos. So we've got some good ones so far. So we're doing well on time, and we can dive a little bit deeper on a few topics. So Gina and Jamie, you've shared how the affiliate stations are responding to local needs and opportunities and tailoring their programming and resources accordingly. But one of the benefits of being part of a network is that you can leverage great content that your colleagues and other affiliate stations are developing. The family math that PBS SoCal is leading is such a great example of that. So I invite you both to talk about that work, with Jamie sharing the genesis of that effort and the research behind it, and Gina sharing how WQED has been able to leverage that content to support kids and families in the Pittsburgh region.
I'll just say that being part of a network is one of the most amazing parts of public media. There is literally nothing like the humans that work at PBS stations across our state and our country, and some of them are on this call today. But what is the most amazing part of it is that everyone is sharing and creating and leveraging in their own communities. And so whether it be family math that we've created that's being shared across the country, and I was sharing in a question and answer that it's with all different kinds of partners, and you can take it and co-brand it and make it your own and use it in your own community if you want to. There's stations across the nation that have chosen topics and are creating content and then leveraging it back. There's a station in California that, or I'm sorry, in Florida, that does this amazing series called Meet the Helpers that stations across America are using and leveraging and taking out, or stations in Maryland that are making, children's educational resources for classrooms, and they're available on Learning Media. And it's just one of the most powerful parts of the system that we're a part of, is that people are creating for a need that they identify in their own community. For us in LA, that was math, and we sought it and we researched it and we built things. But for other communities, it was other needs. And then we're sharing them in ways that then we're not duplicating efforts, and we're not necessarily, all creating the same thing in the same neighborhood. We're really leveraging this system that we're a part of. And I think, therefore, we're stronger in meeting the needs of children and families because we're all working together in that way. And I've seen it happen time and time again in my time within the system, that resources are getting created and they're being shared. And then you'll hear a story of like the work that happened in Tennessee or the work that happened in Idaho. And it's a real great benefit of the system that we're a part of.
Yeah, so specifically with Family Math that Jamie and their team out at SoCal created, they were able to make available to other stations in the system mini grants. And even if you didn't have a mini grant, you could still take advantage of all of the content and resources that they put up for free on their platforms. And so we were lucky enough to apply and be part of one of the mini grants that Jamie's station made available to their colleagues across the country. And so we were able to bring Family Math to 4 specific communities in Pittsburgh to do engaging family times in really cool places like a community garden, in a library, at a neighborhood North Museum here, and implement the family engagement pieces of that Family Math. The reach was even greater than that because they shared their Family Math booklets with us. We were able to hand out over 2,700 of those through the summer. So while we were doing all of that engaging work with our community partners and supporting them, we were also able to just blanket our whole community with an amazing math resource that led to all of the content that Jamie's team has created over there in SoCal. So it's really powerful to be able to have access and share all of that content and not have to reinvent the wheel all of the time.
Yeah, I love the power of networks. So Sara, given where you sit, you're probably able to see lots of other examples of that cross-fertilization. Anything you would like to add about this Family Math example or others that you've seen?
I mean, it's just amazing to see how something that a station can work on in their own community can kind of work in different places throughout the country, and to see those stations sharing. So certainly Family Math is something we've seen move all around, and it's great to see more stations able to leverage those resources. We have some stations who have developed professional development courses for early childhood educators, and through this network have been able to then adapt and replicate those for other stations to help work in their own states. And I think about the example that Jamie mentioned, the Meet the Helpers. When you think about like an event that may be affecting a local community and the ways that it can affect the kids in the community, this is where being a trusted resource, being someone that parents and educators look to, is such a privilege to be able to support. So WUCF, which is in Orlando, Florida, developed a suite of resources around the Pulse nightclub shooting, because that was such a tragic event in their local area and it was affecting so many folks, and was also, it was a moment that was hard for parents to understand how to talk to their kids about it. And they pulled together a suite of videos, of printables, and they did some community events. And it helped them understand the ways that they could then create resources that folks could use for emergency preparedness and ways to respond quickly when a storm goes through, when there's a hurricane, when there's something that's going to be displacing and affecting kids with families, ways to help the kids meet the helpers, but also ways for parents, some guides for how parents can talk to kids in those kinds of moments. So I know that WUCF has shared that Meet the Helpers content with over 100 stations, and it's been distributed to use in response to mass shootings, wildfires, hurricanes. During the pandemic, these things were used again. These are the kinds of things that a local community will realize that they really need, and the station can kind of the stations across the country can kind of step in and provide resources to support them in those moments. It's really an amazing thing to watch.
So this has been such a great overview of the rich content and resources delivered by PBS and its member affiliate stations. Sarah alerted us to the potential funding cuts to PBS, including the termination of the Ready to Learn grants and last week's House rescission vote. What impact would these cuts have on the affiliate stations, the programming and resources we have been discussing, and the children who rely on them?
So as I mentioned, we know that some stations just immediately had to cancel some of the camps they were planning for the summer. This really could affect their abilities to be out in communities and to meet families where they are. It also, PBS stations provide emergency alerts throughout the country, and that also is a really critical service that could go away. So I don't know if Jamie and Gina, you want to add kind of what you're seeing at the local level or what you're hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's work happening deeply, as you described, especially in rural communities that I think we're worried about at the national level, and then specifically locally in Southern California. I think there's a question in the Q&A about ways that people can help. And I know at the beginning we showed that video that was, talking about the helper or the explorers and the scientists. And I think the biggest way that people can help is go to protectmypublicmedia.org. I mean, there really will be a vote in the Senate in the next, what could be several weeks. And that groundswell of support nationally is going to be the thing that people can do to get more involved.
I think locally in Pittsburgh, some of what we're seeing and the effects of the funding being stripped. One of our youth media creation programs has been eliminated or at least put on pause. So that was really a hard pill for us to swallow here in Pittsburgh. We were really proud of that program and that project. We were also a recipient of state funding for Ready to Learn. And so we were doing a lot of really deep work in researching how can stations that have a Ready to Learn grant market and promote all of the amazing things that Ready to Learn has done with other partners and stations, and how do we use state networks to make that happen? One of the state networks we were leveraging was Remake Learning. And so using those state networks and the library systems and our educational systems here in Southwestern Pennsylvania, the parks, using all of those statewide networks to try and figure out the best ways to make sure everybody knows about these free resources and programs that are available. I think for us, that was one of the biggest hits, was that work just ended. And we were right in the middle of doing pilots to figure out the best ways to make sure that information got passed on to people.
I think the other big challenge that we're seeing locally is that there really is no replacement for that large of an amount of federal funding. So like both PBS and stations can't all expect the funder community to fill that entire gap. And so how we navigate, how we partner, how we think about what pieces of that can be fundable or can be shared, I think is a challenge that we have ahead of us. But it is just, and I think why we spend so much effort really talking about the need and the great depth of the federal funding is that it is a significant portion of the work that we're taking on. And while individuals and donors and others are absolutely stepping up to be really thoughtful in the local community, I'm just not sure that there's a full replacement for like that big of a commitment for this kind of specific work.
It makes me think about just how stations are such connectors across so many programs, because we really sit at this interesting intersection where we are providing media to the community, but we also are partnering with local organizations to make sure we're reaching kids. And you think about in this moment, we're all aware that there are all kinds of cuts that are happening beyond just public media that are really having an adverse impact on lower income children. If you think through just, food benefits, if we talk about fluoride in water, if we talk about vaccines, if we talk about just all the cuts that are happening around them, and then also to be cutting this free media that is kind of helping support them get ready for school. I think about just the effects of all of it together, and really thinking about how do we as public media continue to be connectors and help kind of support the overall well-being of children in this moment in these spaces.
Building on what Sara said, I think one of the things that we are focused on in Pittsburgh is figuring out how to collaborate around funding opportunities, because we know that other organizations like WQED who are in art or music or education, we kind of sit at the intersection of all of those things that are in jeopardy right now. And so figuring out how do we collaborate with those other organizations to support each other rather than submitting competitive grants to potential funders is one way that we are really hoping to help support the work that's happening in Pittsburgh to continue to serve children, families, and our community partners.
Okay, now this question actually came up in the question box from Helen Westmoreland, and I know it's on a lot of people's minds. The work on the ground is so unique. It's quality content. You're able to show impacts. What actions can those of us on this call today take to support the high quality children's media and resources you all have been discussing? Let's start with actions that funders can take in this moment, but also like to hear from non-funders as well on what we can do to help support this.
Well, the good news, Dan, is there are many things that we can do. So first, let's talk plainly about money, right? To Jamie's point, we can't fill the gaps that may be lost, but philanthropy can provide general operating support to our local PBS stations. We can provide unrestricted support to the education departments or the community engagement departments of our stations. We can also support the media makers, like, for example, Fred Rogers Productions here in Pittsburgh, if there are producers in your region or in your the geography that you serve. There are all those non-financial things that we can do. I think philanthropy sometimes works best when we're also fundraisers, right? It's not just the privilege of giving away money, but it's easing the burden of the fundraising that Gina and Jamie need to do. And so turning to our colleagues at local corporations like PNC, which has had an incredible program called Grow Up Great, or turning to other private foundations like the Heinz Endowments or the Richard King Mellon Foundation, turning to our United Way, turning to our Community Foundation. There are a whole range of funders, as Pam Johnson noted in the Q&A, to which we can turn. We also can help in building those networks, right? We have the privilege of, for example, convening the after-school community or convening the early childhood community or bringing together unexpected partners like John Bailish mentioned. Like, what if you bring together Carnegie Mellon University with the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh with WQED? What could happen? We have that opportunity and the possibility of bringing people together and making sure then that our PBS stations are at those tables from the very beginning. And then maybe unexpectedly and really importantly, we can help to tell stories. And to Nathaniel's question in the comment, I think, we've made all of this work so normal. And Jamie reminded us, this is free. Like, we just imagine that high quality and free content is dropping down from the trees, but that's not that's not the case. And so we need to be telling the stories. And for example, here at the Grable Foundation, we, of course, care about lots of things as related to kids. And one story that hasn't been told well is the role of the National Science Foundation and the way that the National Science Foundation is connected at a very local level to supporting, for example, AI-infused learning in our schools. Well, we've commissioned writers to help tell those stories. We can be doing the same things with our PBS stations and our media makers. And speaking of media makers, uplifting the op-eds that people like Paul Siefkin from Fred Rogers Productions, the president there, has published in one of our local newspapers, helping to share those stories. So both commissioning the stories, but also uplifting and putting a spotlight on the important and courageous stories that our PBS stations and their partners are telling. There are so many things we can and should be doing, Dan.
Sara, do you want to add to that?
I just want to echo that telling the stories, helping us get the word out. Um, you know, yes, about the funding, but also just about the resources. I mean, this is one of the hardest things right now is to break through in this landscape where there's just so much information coming at everyone so often. But being trusted partners on the ground who can say, these are high quality resources that are really great for our schools, for community partners, for kids. We often hear that people who grew up with PBS immediately think about it and turn to it. But there's so many people in our communities who didn't grow up with PBS, who, moved here in adulthood and aren't aware of this incredible free resource that's available for their kids. So I love everything that Gregg said, and I just want to echo that last piece too, telling those stories, helping us get the word out about these resources, because, the more we continue to serve communities, the more they feel the value and really want to tell others about it. We know that people who have an impact, are impacted by this work, then go on to tell others about it. So sharing those stories too with your local stations, I think that's been helpful for stations to be able to continue to advocate for the work. And I'll repeat the URL that Jamie mentioned, protectmypublicmedia.org is a great resource for just learning how your friends and neighbors can call the Senate and let them know, but also it includes some of the facts and statistics that we've shared. It's a great place to just learn more about the impact of public media.
Okay, I think we have time to transition to some of the questions we have in the Q&A box. We have a few minutes left to dive into this. I can start with one of the stickiest ones because we have some time to talk about it. So this is from Nathaniel Pettit. To the extent that you can you help us understand why Ready to Learn funds were identified by the administration for termination, given the amazing impact the panelists have described? In an uncertain political future, how might the RTL program, its funding, and its influence on PBS stations adapt so that its impact can continue to support children and families in generations to come?
So why is a great question. I think what we are feeling is that the administration is just looking at many different ways to defund public media. The termination of the Ready to Learn grant happened the day after the president issued an executive order calling for federal agencies to stop funding PBS. And so I'm not sure that it was actually targeted, but just part of all of that general strategy to try to defund public media across the board. But you're right. We really want to tell this story. I think we've had such an outpouring from the community to talk about the impact of, in particular, the PBS Kids content on their lives. And we know that that information is resonating and is being heard by lawmakers. We know that over 2 million calls and emails have gone into the Hill in support of public media. And so we want that to continue, that we can keep talking about this work. But certainly we all are in the middle of figuring out how to adapt in this moment with fewer resources. And that's where we really are hoping for the partnership of other organizations to help us get the word out about this work and help us continue to keep this work moving forward. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that, but.
Well, I mean, I think the honest answer is it just doesn't make sense, right? I mean, we're talking about Eleanor and Daniel and Carl and all of these characters that we as parents and as aunts and uncles and as kids ourselves, have come to love. And this goodness has gotten caught up in something so much else. I'd like to think, I hope it's true, that if there were just a straight up and down vote about PBS Kids, like the evidence would be overwhelming. I would hope the politics would be overwhelming, but it's just trying to make sense of it just doesn't make sense.
So in terms of actions we can do, we talked about storytelling. We've had a lot of good ideas already, but how do we continue to let people know about what are the impacts of these funding cuts on the ground, and just how it's going to, what it's going to mean for families over the next, if this is something becomes permanent. Any additional ideas? Yeah, go ahead.
I was
Go ahead,
just
Jamie.
going to say, I think Sarah said it earlier, and while yes, I know today we're talking about us and public media and sort of the devastating cuts that have happened to us, I think the real risk for children and families is like the breadth of cuts for them. And so whether it be PBS as a safe haven where they might, choose to, watch content together with a family, or frankly, watch content not with a family in place of potentially attending preschool, it's the preschools themselves. So thinking about Head Start or thinking about other places, that are trickle down, even the libraries or, places in the community. And so I think the thing that is the most important now is really kind of not shying away from continuing to do the work, because continuing to do the work or adapting to figure out how to continue pieces of the work is going to be the impetus for that story we continue to tell. So in a moment when it feels chaotic and in a moment where you feel like you have to kind of move things around to sort of make things happen, or you have to reach out to make a new strategic partnership or talk to a funder who you weren't necessarily like ready to sort of like jump all in with, like you have to kind of take the leap and really move in a way that is still supporting those children and families, because the lawmaker conversations are real, and it's the families on the ground that are calling Congress, or, stakeholders themselves, funders themselves calling Congress and saying, like, don't let the next cut be the thing that really does take the majority of the funding away.
We had a couple of funder related questions I'll batch together. So the first is, I'll read them both. Can you speak to the range of funders that work with local stations as well as national PBS kids content producers? And then what drives these funders and ways in which they chose to support public media's educational mission? So that's the first broad question, but then more specifically, we had an anonymous attendee ask, given the current federal funding scenario for public media, what's the best way to communicate with local funders in grant applications? Given that there's so much uncertainty, is it making funders nervous? Like, so who are the funders, and is the landscape shifting for them as well?
Yes. All right. So as an N of one, I mean, I just look, there's chaos all around us, right? And so whether we see cuts to IMLS and the impacts on museums and libraries, or proposed cuts to 21st century learning centers and the impact on after-school programs, or proposed cuts to SNAP programs, we see an entire landscape of nonprofit organizations and civil society in incredible dislocation and nervousness. And I don't think we as Americans have stepped back to say, over the past 40 or 50 years, there's been an incredible devolution of services that were once provided directly by government agencies and now have been contracted by government through nonprofit organizations to deliver the types of things that Americans want, need, and deserve. So we see incredible dislocation all around us. I think if these cuts move ahead, whether it's to PBS and PBS Kids or to some of these other programs that Sarah and I and others have mentioned, we're just going to see, as Jamie described, a diminished quality of life and experience and opportunities for families and kids. And honestly, we're going to see some of our remarkable PBS stations, particularly in rural locations, disappear. They're not, it's not fair that, it's not here to put them on the spot, but I think of WQLN in Erie, Pennsylvania, 2 hours north of Pittsburgh. I don't know. What is the future of a station in a more rural, less resourced, more isolated, smaller American community as compared to WGBH in Boston or other places? And so I just worry about the disappearance of high quality and the access to high quality, and the families and schools and libraries in those places. Where will they turn? So yes, all sorts of anxiety.
And I
Anything
think the
else?
range, I was just going to say the range, I mean, Greg said it so perfectly on sort of what I think anyone who's asking for funding, but anyone who's thinking about giving funding, how changed the landscape is in the last like 90 days. And I think that that landscape really opens up for stations. You know, the question was sort of where else are where else are organizations seeking funding? And I think that's really vast. I mean, that's everything from on the call, you see community foundations to family foundations to, major philanthropic individuals who are deeply committed to the impact, who want to support the work, to foundations like the ones Dan and Greg represent, who are, thinking about public media. I think it's scary to think about kind of what the road ahead is for just the nonprofit landscape in general. And while I do think a lot of those funders come to the table because of the research, because of the impact, because of everything we've shared today, Greg, you said it so perfectly. I don't think there's enough philanthropy to fill the gap. And so, like, what does that really mean for sort of the work as we go forward as like a nation, as a system, as a community?
So there was a question in the chat that also focused on the networks that we've mentioned that we can be part of, and higher ed, and how can they help to support and be part of what is happening. I mentioned that we have partnered with a local university around research. That has been amazing for us. And they're doing it at a very minimal cost because they're using doctoral students to help us get that research done and analyzed, and give that data to us. But I also think that we are really lucky in Pittsburgh to have CMU in our backyard, and the technologies and the support that they might be able to provide. I mentioned that we had to pause one of our student led media creation programs. And so maybe that's a conversation with a university around what they're doing, what they have to offer, and how that might support some of what we're doing. And so potentially really leaning into the higher ed students and what they have to offer could help them and help us, give them real life experience, and also help us get things done.
Dan, I can't help but think, two walls behind me is the Monongahela River. The Monongahela River flows down to the confluence of the Allegheny and the Ohio. And right there at the confluence is this memorial to children and families. It's a statue of Fred Rogers. And Fred Rogers stands there as a constant reminder to Pittsburgh, but also to America, to, as he said, think of the kids first. And that's what those of us here need to do. That's what we need to ask of ourselves and of our neighbors. And it's what we need to ask of our elected officials. And if we think of the kids first and what American kids want, need, and deserve, part of the richness of their childhood and the learning and the connections with the adults in their lives comes from places like Eleanor Wonders Why and Daniel Tiger and Carl the Collector and everything that PBS Kids does.
Well, Greg, I can't think of a better way to end this conversation than quoting Fred Rogers. So I appreciate that as the way to close it out. We are bumping up on time right now. Thanks everyone for participating. I'm going to turn it over to Sara now to close us out.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you just said, Dan, and just kudos to Greg for closing us out that way. Think of the kids first. And I mean, I feel like this entire 90 minutes has been focused on incredible kids focused content and resources and supports, and just critical in nature, vital, and just I hope that everybody listening in feels all the more compelled to support, do what we can to support the continuation of the federal funding that is vital to ensuring that these are sustained and available for kids in generations to come. So huge thanks to all of our panelists today, to Sara DeWitt, to Gregg Behr, to Gina Masciola, to Jamie Myers, and in deep appreciation to you, Dan, for kind of guiding us through today's conversation. And thanks to all of you who listened in today and shared all these great questions in the Q&A box. I hope you'll join us for future sessions. Sierra opened us up earlier in the conversation with lots and lots of learning opportunities in the coming weeks. Starting off with this afternoon, we've got a session that we're doing in partnership with the Stanford Center for the Early Childhood, looking at insights that they have gotten from the parents and caregivers that they've been serving over the past 5 years about the material hardship, kind of struggles with making ends meet around housing, food, healthcare, and all of the supports that they need for children. And then next week, we'll be starting off the day of a doubleheader with a session in partnership with New America, with some insights from their leaders in their Learning Sciences Exchange Fellowship about family engagement and building stronger connections with family. And then that kicks us off. And then later on that afternoon, we're kicking off our Technology Enhanced Teaching and Learning webinar series, which will run from June 24th through July 22nd. Every week, we'll have another session exploring the ways that education technology can support children's learning in the classroom, in the home, in the community, looking at children with learning differences, building connections between parents, tutoring programs, and more. And then the week after that, we'll be starting GLR Week 2025, looking at how we can close the gaps and accelerate children's equitable learning recovery post-pandemic, ensuring early school success. Every day, Monday through Thursday, we'll be having a double header with a session at 12:30 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Eastern in the afternoon, looking at big bet approaches that have evidence behind them about how they can drive student success and support student learning. So I hope you'll join us for all of those links in the chat and have a great rest of your day. Thanks again to everybody.